Cold, open. There is a list in the Bible of animals God told Israel never to eat. Bacon is on it, shrimp, crab, lobster, rabbit, eel, blood sausage. Foods that millions of people now eat without a second thought were, for ancient Israel, completely off the table. For generations, these commands were dismissed as primitive superstition, written by people who knew nothing about bacteria, parasites, or disease. Then, modern researchers started examining the animals on the list. Some of what they found is hard to wave away. Animals on that list carry parasites you cannot see. Some filter contaminants out of the water and concentrate them in their flesh. Some sit so high on the food chain that heavy metals build up inside them for decades. But here is what almost every video on this subject leaves out. The Bible never says these animals were banned because they were poisonous. Leviticus connects the dietary laws to holiness, separation, and Israel's identity as a covenant people. Modern science can identify real risks in some of these foods, but it does not prove that health was the only reason or even the main one behind any single command. That will matter in every entry here. Some forbidden foods can be eaten safely today when inspected, stored correctly, and thoroughly cooked. And some foods the Bible permitted can still make you sick when mishandled. So this is not a video claiming that everyone who eats shrimp or bacon will get sick. And it is not an attempt to settle whether Christians today are bound by the dietary laws of ancient Israel. Jewish communities continue to observe kosher law. Many Christians read Mark 7, Acts 10, and Romans 14 as changing how those distinctions apply under the new covenant. That argument is not ending in a YouTube video. The question we are asking is more interesting than either side of it. When you look at the animals Israel was told to refuse, do patterns appear that nobody living without a microscope could possibly have seen? Stay until number 5, because it involves a fish that health authorities still tell pregnant women to avoid for a reason that takes decades to build up inside its body. Number 2 was forbidden for a reason the Bible states out loud, and modern medicine found a completely different danger hiding inside it. And number 1 is the most famous forbidden food in history. It is on your screen right now. And the reason it was banned is not the reason you have been told. 10 foods, 3,000 years. Let us count down. Number 10. Rodents and reptiles. Leviticus rejects a long list of swarming and crawling creatures. The precise translation of every ancient animal name is debated, but the list appears to include mice, lizards, geckos, and other animals that move close to the ground. These were not only forbidden as food. Contact with their dead bodies could make objects and people ritually unclean. And modern science has found real zoonotic risk in these groups. Rodents contaminate food and surfaces with urine, droppings, and saliva. Hantaviruses spread when people inhale contaminated particles or consume food contaminated with rodent body fluids. Reptiles carry salmonella without appearing sick at all. Snakes, lizards, and turtles shed the bacteria into their environment, contaminating hands, equipment, and any surface where food is prepared. This does not mean every reptile or rodent is poisonous. Some cultures have long traditions of preparing them carefully, and controlled cooking destroys many pathogens. But wild animals bring questions nobody could answer. Where did it live? What did it eat? Was it sick? Was it poisoned? How long has it been dead? An ancient household had no way to find out, so the law created distance instead. The small creature moving through storage jars, wall cavities, waste, and dead material does not become dinner. In a world where grain had to be defended from infestation, that boundary carried practical value, even though holiness is what the text itself emphasizes. Number 9. Vultures, eagles, and birds of prey. For birds, Leviticus does not give a physical rule the way it does for land animals and fish. It simply lists them. Eagles, vultures, kites, ravens, owls, hawks, predators, and scavengers. What connects them is not anatomy. It is position in the food chain. Modern environmental science shows that persistent contaminants move upward through food webs and concentrate in higher-level predators. Studies have documented mercury bioaccumulation in birds, with the highest exposure among species feeding near the top. Scavengers may also encounter remains contaminated with pathogens, veterinary drugs, or heavy metals. But that cannot be stretched into a complete explanation. Contamination depends on species, environment, prey, and pollution type. And ancient landscapes did not contain the industrial chemicals that make this a problem today. Plenty of permitted birds can carry disease when handled badly. The pattern is more likely symbolic than medical. Israel could eat animals connected with grazing, domestication, and ordinary food production. The forbidden birds survived by tearing flesh, hunting prey, or waiting beside something that had died. Every animal carried a pattern of life. Some gathered seed, some grazed, some hunted, some fed on death. The law asked Israel to notice which was which. Number 8. Insects and the exception. Nobody expects. Most people assume the Bible banned eating insects outright. It did not. Leviticus prohibits most wing-swarming creatures, but carves out an exception for certain jumping insects, generally understood to include locusts and related species. Which is why John the Baptist can later be described as living on locusts and wild honey without breaking any law at all. Modern culture is circling back to this. Crickets, mealworms, and grasshoppers carry substantial protein and need far fewer resources than conventional livestock. But insect is not one category from a safety standpoint. There are millions of species. Some carry defensive chemicals. Some feed on decaying material. Some accumulate pesticides or heavy metals. Others pick up bacteria and molds from whatever substrate they were raised on. European food safety assessments stress that the risk depends on the species, what it was fed, when it was harvested, and how it was processed. Insect proteins can also trigger allergic reactions, including cross-reactions in people allergic to shellfish or dust mites. And modern science cannot prove that the permitted locust group is universally safe, while every prohibited insect is harmful. Edible insects require identification, controlled raising, and proper processing, regardless of which side of the line they fall on. But look at what the law actually did. It did not claim every insect was equally dangerous. It separated a narrow, recognizable group from everything else, And it did it in a way a shepherd could remember without a field guide. Most are not food. A few may be. And in a region where a swarm could erase a harvest in an afternoon, that exception preserved something valuable. The creature capable of destroying your food could become food. Number 7, camel. The camel was essential to life in the ancient Near East. It carried people, moved goods, and crossed country nothing else could. Camel milk and meat are still consumed across parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And Leviticus forbade it because it chews the cud, but does not have a fully divided hoof. The animal almost qualified. Almost was not enough. Modern research has identified health concerns tied specifically to raw camel products. Dromedary camels are associated with Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, MERS-CoV. The World Health Organization advises people at high risk of severe disease to avoid raw camel milk and undercooked camel meat, and stresses that properly cooked meat and pasteurized milk are safer than raw animal products. But notice the shape of that warning. It is not against camel meat forever. It is against infected animals and raw or inadequately processed products. The biblical restriction was far broader. No camel in any preparation. The animal sat outside the permitted category entirely, which means MERS cannot be presented as the secret reason God forbade camels 3,000 years earlier. It is one modern example of a zoonotic risk discovered in the last 15 years, attached to an animal banned in the Bronze Age. The real structure is theological. The camel belonged to transport, trade, labor, and survival. For Israel, being useful did not make an animal edible. That idea barely computes now. We assume that if an animal can be turned into food, eventually someone will. The law put a fence around appetite. Not everything useful had to be consumed. Number 6, rabbit and hare. Leviticus forbids the hare, describing it as chewing the cud without having a divided hoof. Rabbits and hares are not ruminants, but they practice something called psychotrophy, producing a soft, nutrient-rich dropping and eating it again, sending food through the digestive system twice. To an ancient observer watching an animal chew something back up that looked close enough to cud chewing, rabbit meat itself is lean and eaten safely across much of the world. But wild rabbits and hares carry a disease hunters still take seriously: tularemia. The bacterium infects rabbits, hares, rodents, and humans. Exposure comes through tick bites, contaminated water, inhaled particles, or direct skin contact while handling infected tissue. Hunters are exposed while skinning and dressing infected animals. Handle an infected rabbit with a cut on your hand, and you have created an entry point. Undercook the meat, and you have added a second. But as with everything on this list, that does not make rabbit inherently dangerous. Farm-raised rabbit from a regulated source is prepared safely every day, and even wild rabbit can be handled with precautions and cooked properly where hunting is legal. Here is the difference that matters. The command did not say, "Avoid the sick rabbit." It removed the animal. Modern food safety manages risk through inspection, protective equipment, controlled farming, and treatment when something goes wrong. Biblical law managed the category by refusing it. One system says, "Learn to make the animal safer." The other said, "Do not make it food." Number 5. Shark and the scaleless fish. Leviticus gave Israel one rule for anything living in water: fins and scales, both. That excluded sharks, rays, eels, and every fish without ordinary visible scales. And this category is where the tidy medical theory falls apart, so it is worth being honest about it. Plenty of scaleless fish are perfectly safe. Catfish is eaten worldwide and is a good protein source when raised, handled, and cooked properly. Eels are eaten safely in many cultures after proper preparation, but one forbidden scaleless fish carries a striking modern warning. The shark! Sharks are large, long-lived predators. As they eat smaller animals across decades, methylmercury accumulates in their tissue. The FDA places shark among the highest mercury fish and advises pregnant people, young children, and other vulnerable groups to choose lower mercury seafood. The mechanism is biomagnification. A small organism absorbs a contaminant. A larger animal eats thousands of them. A predator eats those animals. At every step, the concentration climbs. An ancient fisherman could see that a shark was a predator. He could not measure what 40 years of eating predators had left in its flesh. But shark cannot explain the whole category. Fish with fins and scales can also contain mercury, parasites, and dangerous bacteria. Fish without visible scales can be entirely safe when sourced and cooked correctly. The law was taxonomic before it was medical. It sorted creation into recognizable groups and taught Israel to tell them apart. Science can find real risk inside parts of that system. It cannot honestly claim one health explanation covering every fish in it, which may be the more interesting answer. The law was bigger than nutrition. Number 4. Animals found dead. Now an animal that may have been perfectly permitted and became forbidden entirely because of how it died. Deuteronomy tells Israel not to eat an animal found dead. Exodus prohibits meat from an animal torn by wild beasts. From a food safety view, the logic is immediate. Why did it die? Disease, poison, a bite from something else? How long was the carcass in the heat? Had the gut ruptured and contaminated the meat? Without controlled slaughter, none of those questions had answers. Modern meat inspection exists partly to keep sick animals and unsafe carcasses out of the food supply. Cooking kills many pathogens, but it cannot reverse decomposition or remove a toxin already in the tissue. An animal found dead arrives with no history, no inspection, no controlled bleeding, no known time of death, no guarantee it was healthy an hour before it fell. Of everything on this list, this is the entry that lines up most cleanly with a modern principle. Do not eat meat when you cannot establish how it entered the food supply. And then the text adds a detail that ruins the medical explanation completely. Deuteronomy says the dead animal could be given to a foreign resident or sold to a foreigner. Israel was not to eat it because Israel was a holy people. Read that again. If the meat were simply lethal, why is selling it to your neighbor acceptable? It was not a health regulation. It was a boundary marker. Israel's table was different because Israel's calling was different. The safety benefit was real. Holiness is the reason the passage gives. Number 3, shellfish. The fins and scales rule swept away an entire industry before it existed. Oysters, mussels, clams, shrimp, prawns, crab, lobster, squid. Most of what a coastal restaurant now sells at the highest price on the menu. And the modern parallel here is genuinely uncomfortable. Many molluscan shellfish feed by filtering enormous volumes of water. That is how they eat. It also means whatever is in the surrounding water concentrates inside their tissue. They accumulate toxins produced by naturally occurring algae, and those toxins remain in the flesh when the water looks clean. Normal cooking does not reliably destroy every marine biotoxin. Raw and undercooked shellfish also expose people to coastal bacteria. The CDC warns that raw oysters are a major source of Vibrio infection. Most cases mean vomiting and diarrhea, but Vibrio vulnificus can cause bloodstream infection, tissue destruction, limb amputation, and death, particularly in people with liver disease or weakened immune systems. And shellfish carry one more danger nobody in the ancient world could have understood biologically: allergy. Shrimp, crab, and lobster are recognized major food allergens, and for a susceptible person, a small amount is enough to trigger a severe immune reaction. So, should everyone stop eating shellfish? No. Millions eat properly harvested, thoroughly cooked shellfish without ever getting sick. And modern monitoring systems close harvesting areas the moment contamination is detected. But ancient Israel had none of that. No water testing, no bloom monitoring, no refrigerated transport from the coast inland, no way of knowing whether one oyster held something that would kill a vulnerable person. The law erased that entire zone of uncertainty in one sentence. If it does not have fins and scales, leave it in the water. Number 2. Blood. Now the clearest and most repeated food prohibition in the entire Bible. Blood is eaten today all over the world. Blood sausage, black pudding, blood soup. Dishes made from pig, duck, goat, and cattle blood. Leviticus forbade it to Israel. And unlike almost everything else on this list, the Bible does not leave the reason to speculation. It states it. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Blood was tied to life, to sacrifice, and to atonement. It belonged to God in a way no other part of the animal did, and it was to be poured out rather than consumed. That explanation comes straight from the text. Modern science later found something else sitting inside it. Blood carries pathogens throughout an infected animal's body. Consuming it raw or insufficiently cooked can transmit serious disease. Research documented by the CDC has linked raw pig blood consumption with Streptococcus suis infection, which can cause meningitis, septicemia, permanent hearing loss, and death. Cooking reduces many of these dangers, and regulated blood-based foods are eaten safely in numerous cultures. But blood has a particular problem. When an animal is infected, muscle tissue may be contained. Blood is not. The substance that carries oxygen and nutrients through a body will also carry an infection through that same body. And yet the Bible did not need germ theory to arrive at its command. The scientific risk is real. The stated reason is spiritual. Which is the most important correction in this entire video. We do not honor Scripture by swapping its explanation for one that sounds more modern. Sometimes, science uncovers a practical benefit nobody could have known about. And sometimes, the text already told us the deeper reason, and we were not listening. Number 1. Pork, the most famous forbidden food in history. Leviticus describes the pig as an animal with a divided hoof that does not chew the cud. One identifying mark out of 2. Israel was told not to eat its flesh or touch its carcass. To a modern reader, that sounds arbitrary. A cow chews the cud and has the hoof, so it is permitted. A pig has the hoof and not the behavior, so it is banned. It reads like a technicality. And pork carries one of the most recognizable food safety stories in history. Trichinellosis is caused by microscopic roundworms of the genus Trichinella. Infection comes from eating raw or undercooked meat containing the larvae. Pork was historically associated with the disease, though modern commercial farming and inspection have made pork infections uncommon in countries with strict controls. Wild boar and other game now account for many remaining cases. To an ancient person, the danger was invisible. The meat looked normal. It smelled normal. It could be cooked enough to change color while never reaching a temperature that killed every parasite. And with no refrigeration, no thermometers, no controlled feed, and no microscope, there is no way to close that gap. But here is where the popular version of this story goes wrong. Pigs are not poisonous. Pork from a regulated source, stored and cooked properly, is safe, and hundreds of millions of people eat it daily without incident. The evidence shows that undercooked pork can transmit disease. It does not show that trichinellosis was the reason behind Leviticus. And there is a detail in the text that should stop the parasite theory outright. The law does not say to cook the pig thoroughly. It does not say to avoid pork in summer, or to inspect it, or to keep it away from the sick. Every one of those instructions would have been possible to write, and the same book gives detailed procedures for handling mold, discharge, and disease elsewhere. It says, "Do not eat it, and do not touch its carcass." You do not write that rule about a parasite. You write it about a boundary. Which brings us back to why the pig, of all animals, became the symbol of the whole system. It was not the most dangerous animal on the list. It was the closest to acceptable. It had the right hoof. From across a field it belonged with the permitted animals. But it did not chew the cud, and close enough was not the standard. That is the lesson underneath every entry we have counted through. Something can look acceptable from the outside and still fail the test that actually matters. Conclusion: the biblical dietary laws were not random. Land animals needed specific characteristics. Water animals needed fins and scales. Crawling creatures were rejected. Blood belonged to God. Animals found dead were excluded. Those distinctions may well have protected Israelites from parasites, bacterial infection, marine toxins, and contaminated carcasses. And modern science lets us see those risks far more clearly than the ancient world could. But science has not found one clean medical explanation covering every animal on the list, and pretending otherwise helps nobody. Pork is safe when properly raised and cooked. Shellfish is safe when harvested from monitored water and handled correctly. Rabbit, camel, eel, catfish, and edible insects can all be prepared safely under controlled conditions. Meanwhile, beef, poultry, fish, milk, and grain, all permitted, still transmit disease when contaminated or mishandled. So the dietary laws cannot honestly be reduced to an ancient food safety manual. They were part of a covenant. They taught Israel that holiness reached past the temple, past prayer, past sacrifice, and into the kitchen, into the market, into every ordinary meal. Every time an Israelite sat down, the plate was a reminder that belonging to God changed even the smallest decisions. And maybe that is why these commands still generate this much curiosity. They force a question the modern world almost never asks. Just because something can be eaten, does that mean it should be? For some, the answer is theological. For others, ethical, environmental, medical, or entirely personal. But these laws remind us that appetite was never meant to be the highest authority in the room. So which one surprised you most? Pork and its invisible parasites? Shellfish filtering contaminated water? Shark accumulating mercury across decades? Blood carrying infection through a body? Or the animal found dead, refused not because it was lethal, but because Israel's table was meant to mean something? Tell us in the comments. And remember, science can explain bacteria, parasites, toxins, and contamination. It cannot measure what a meal means to a people who believed even their food belonged to God.